When and where I grew up, there was this general belief that Mormon missionaries had some God given ability to learn languages quickly. This rumor of fantastic language success has spread far and wide and still remains pretty strong to this day. Other YouTubers have created popular videos about the Mormon secrets to language learning, some of which you might have already seen. And people who only know a little bit about the church largely wonder how in the world the missionaries do it. Well, I happen to be in a pretty unique position. So, way back in the day, back in 2003, I learned German at the Missionary Training Center of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, known colloquially as the Mormon Church. And yeah, I'm going to call it the Mormons for the rest of this video. If you're offended by that, I don't know, go tell me in the comments or something. I also studied Chinese at Brigham Young University starting in 2005. That means I went the way the most learners will learn if you learn in college. I went from Chinese 101 up as far as you can get. I was a Chinese major, part of my double major. And I also studied Korean at the Foreign Service Institute in Arlington, Virginia, not far from here, in 2010 and 2011. And I've also had experience learning languages on my own from scratch, and I've done it a couple of times. Anyway, I say all of this because it gives me a pretty unique perspective on what works and what doesn't work. And today, I'm not holding back any secrets at all, right? I'm going to talk all about the Mormon brand of language learning, and we'll tell you what it's really like. So the truth is that there's no super special spiritual hack or gift of tongues from God or anything like that. While some aspects of the process are impressive, once you understand how it works, you'll realize that it's really not magic at all. Now, there are certainly a few things you can learn from the Mormon process that could help you in your own language studies. And there are also a few things the church does that you should probably stay away from if you want to be successful. All right, guys, like I said, I'm not holding anything back. We're going to go over the good and the bad here. But the thing is, there are two caveats, right? First of all, I'm not interested in talking about theology, religion, church doctrine, or any of that stuff. That includes the scandals. Yes, I know about the scandals. You can talk about that some other place, not here. Second, you have to realize that I went through the Missionary Training Center, which I'm going to call the MTC for the most part here, way back in 2003. Now, there are chances that a lot of things have changed since then, though I really doubt that many things have changed in terms of how language learning works. Maybe they use AI or something, in which case it's probably worse than it was when I was there. Anyway, with nothing else to say on that matter, let's just go ahead and get started. First of all, by looking at how the missionary system itself works. Okay, so first things first, if you want to be a missionary, you got to fill out one of these long forms. You've got to be a member of the church for at least a year, and of course, you have to be willing to go serve a mission wherever the church sends you. And you've also got to have one of these endorsements from your ecclesiastical leaders. Assuming that you do get the endorsement and jump through all the hoops, the church will then assign you to work in a certain mission. That process is pretty opaque, and when you get your assignment, you basically either take it or you leave it. But of course, we would take whatever we got because we believed that the assignments literally came from God. Anyway, if you already spoke the language that you were assigned to, if you were going to Germany, you already spoke German, you didn't go to the language school, right? You would go to the MTC, but just over to the doctrine side for a week or something like that, and then they ship you out. Now, if you didn't speak the language, which is what counted for most of us, you would be at the MTC for an extended period of time. Most foreign languages, this was 2 months, or it'd be 3 months if you were learning Chinese, Japanese, Korean, or one of the other hard languages. Now, when you get to the Missionary Training Center, you basically spend all of your time there. It's kind of like boot camp for missionaries. That means that you sleep there, you eat there, you spend all of your time either studying language or theology. It's really similar to going into the military, to be honest with you. But hey man, the food is good, or at least I thought the food was good when I went there. Anyway, they wind up teaching you language or something like that for 4 to 5 hours of each day, every single day, with really 1 day off a week, your preparation day. You also would have a little bit less class on Sunday because of church meetings, though, as I recall, after church was done, we would have class. They would also teach you how to proselytize. They would start you off in English, and then they would move you over to the target language after something like a week. And yeah, this was a really extremely fast process. Now, the other thing I need to address is this idea that we were somehow fluent when we left after 2 months. That's just not true. The truth is that they give you a crash course. It's something to get you to the basics and give you a foundation that you can later build upon. And those who have been through the process and are being honest with you will tell you the same thing. So this is really where we get into the things that work and the things that don't work. So we'll start off with the things that I feel works. When I went to the MTC over 20 years ago, the program was fairly well organized, though in retrospect, I do think that there were some gaping holes and some significant problems. But there were things that worked really, really well. For example, the language units were focused almost exclusively on grammar with only a little bit of vocabulary. In the 2 months I spent there learning German, almost every word that I learned was related either to the church or to somehow surviving everyday life. We spent a lot of our language time going over grammatical points, kind of like a high-level overview of the way that the language fit together. We would use mnemonic devices like songs to remember which prepositions took like the accusative case, for example. And we even got to some of the harder grammatical points like the two forms of the subjunctive, things that ordinary language learners will take years to get to. Now, if you've got an extremely simple vocabulary, one that's really only focused on achieving the goal of preaching, then you can get away with focusing all of your time and effort on teaching grammar. The thing is that you can form pretty much any kind of conceivable grammatically correct sentence using limited vocabulary. So this more or less worked out for us. And I guess the idea was that we would fill in all of these massive holes that we had in our vocabulary just by going to the country and being there. The other thing is that we basically had no tests. At least I don't remember having any tests. Instead, the language learning program was really heavily focused on role-playing or getting you into certain scenarios where you absolutely had to use the language. And that included things like teaching mock lessons to volunteers who were usually native speakers of the language who were attending Brigham Young University, which is just down the street. So instead of, sitting down in the classroom and taking a test in the safety of the classroom, you were forced to use the language with a native speaker from something like the second week or something like that. Yeah, this was pretty stressful. It was a real baptism by fire. And there was another pretty strict rule during my time there, something that they called speak your language. Basically, the rule was that you were supposed to only speak in your target language almost all of the time right from the start. I say almost all the time because there were a couple times where you were allowed to speak English, though those chances became fewer and further between as you went on. And well, that enforced simulated immersion has its strengths and its weaknesses. So this is the point where we start getting to the stuff that didn't really work all that well. Now, I do suspect that some of these things might have changed over the years. Other things, though, will likely never change just because of how the system works. Okay, so first of all, we were taught to always speak formally, always use Sie, never du. Just like this random blog post I found says, our understanding was that you would always use du for someone younger than you or somebody you had a close relationship with. However, we were strictly instructed to only use du when we were speaking with a literal child and never with anyone else. So the reason they told us this, and I'm not kidding about this, I'm dead serious, they told us not to do this because the devil would attack us if we developed a really close language with anybody. And so we just got used to using formal language all the time. It got to the point where most of us, including myself, had a real hard time communicating using the do form because we had to sit there and think during the sentence about how to conjugate the verbs. And yeah, that's a problem. I mean, yeah, you really don't want to use do when you shouldn't for risk of offending someone. In all seriousness, though, we met quite a few very nice people in southern Germany who really did want to become close friends with us. And, honestly, these strict and totally arbitrary language requirements prevented us from getting close to anybody. And honestly, I mean, the whole thing, when I look back on this, is really bizarre. Yeah, I know they were worried about missionaries dating or having sex or whatever, but it's still totally bizarre to me that you would, put the fear of God into people with rumors of satanic influence and stuff like that. And this problem, you see, hints at the underlying truth underneath all of this. The truth is, we were not really there to become integrated into the culture or to truly learn the language. What we were really doing is we were glorified salesmen. In fact, in a very real sense, we were kind of forbidden to really learn about the local culture. Our reading and studying, for example, was limited to scriptures and church material, including when we were in the country. And so those of us who were interested in literature would wind up reading the books of scripture over and over again. Now, the problem with the scriptures unique to Mormonism is that they are all translated from English, and that means that they include a lot of features that are unique to the English language. If we really wanted to learn the language, we should have been reading like authentic native written German literature, not just rereading the same books of scripture over and over again. Anyway, like you guys know how I am from my videos, so it won't surprise you to know that I broke the rules and I bought actual literature books. So you could get these babies, these little reclam books for like really, really cheap, like for a couple euro back then. I wish we had something like that here in the United States, then maybe I would actually buy books. Now, the thing is though that the restrictions on what we were allowed to read and this fear mongering that we were subjected to were still pretty extreme. So for example, we were not even allowed to watch television, and if we went to a home that had a TV on, we were told to ask them to turn it off. And I mean, we kind of followed that rule, but seriously, when you're like a 20-year-old guy, I wasn't going to deprive myself of sports every now and then. The bigger thing though is that we were also not allowed to read newspapers. And this whole thing really played with my psyche. Like there was a time when my mission companion and I decided that we were going to go break the rules and we were going to go buy like a newspaper or two at a newspaper stand downtown. And so we did it, we bought it and we brought it home, we started to read it. And while we were reading it, I was overcome with like this tremendous feeling of guilt. It was almost like, I'd done like an unpardonable sin and that I should just give up and go home. And so I threw away the newspaper before I had read like even a quarter of it. Anyway, that's really not a healthy environment for learning languages, right? This is an environment where you probably should go talk with like a mental health specialist. And of course, you couldn't get any outside news in at all when you were at the MTC, even if you really wanted to go out and like find it and sneak it in. Now, the other thing that most people don't realize is that most of the language teachers at the MTC are not native speakers of the language. And so that meant you had foreigners teaching other foreigners, which means that there were all sorts of strange mistakes that would pop up. This only got worse when I was actually in Germany, since the missionaries tended to share a certain type of slang with each other that was a completely modified form of the language. So like I said before, the point really was not to teach you the language. Instead, it was to have you learn just enough so you could go door to door, or you could go outside and talk with people you met on the street. And so as a result, my German still has some of these really bizarre eccentricities to this day. In particular, there are a lot of bad pronunciation habits that I honestly have never been able to break. But of course, it doesn't mean that it's all bad news. There are some things that you can learn from the Mormon approach to language learning to help you with your own language learning. For example, it can really be helpful if you give yourself at least a high-level overview of the entire grammar of the language early on in the learning process. Sure, there are things that are going to be difficult to learn until you've got the right amount of vocabulary, especially if we're talking about a really hard language. However, I firmly believe that you should prioritize learning grammar when you're at the low intermediate level, and then let that vocabulary build up naturally. I'm serious when I say that I believe this approach is much better than trying to memorize frequency lists of words all day long. Now, you've got to remember that learning grammar is really about getting a feel for the grammar, not just memorizing rules. That's the thing that the Germans call Sprachgefühl, right? This is not just like this abstract concept, though since it's a German concept, we tend to think of it as being abstract. You can't get a feel for the language and for its grammar unless you are totally immersed in it in some way or another. So again, don't expect that you can go like memorize a bunch of grammatical principles and get it, or that you can go sing a song about like dative particles or something like that to get it. That's what we tried to do. That might give you a little bit of a boost. The reality is that it takes a lot of time. In particular, you need to be patient with yourself. Now, the issue is that the concept of being patient with yourself does not really fit in with this idea that you're going to become a well-polished door-to-door salesman within 2 months. Anyway, another thing to learn from all of this is that formal language tests are nowhere near as effective as actually, talking with people. Sure, you're probably not going to go into somebody's home and give them your religion spiel. Understandably. But the thing is, though, that taking endless tests and quizzes, those really don't prepare you for actually learning the language or actually being fluent in it. You need to really find a way to actually use the language, which often means hiring a native speaker tutor. And don't settle for some random foreigner who the missionary department hired for some stupid reason, right? You need a native speaker because you really need to hear the rhythms of native speech. I struggled a lot when I first arrived in southern Germany. This was in part because of the Bayerish and the Schwäbisch accents, right? But it's also in part because I was used to American style German, right? Because I was taught by a bunch of Americans who had American accents. Anyway, there are two other lessons you can learn from this about what not to do. So first of all, obviously, it's a lot better for you to read widely than to only read translated religious texts. You really should want to learn both the language and the culture, not just to go to your destination to spread your own culture. And yeah, that means taking time off to have a drink and watch some football just like the natives. In fact, you're going to find that it's easier to get closer to people if you actually learn about their culture than if you just stand around preaching at them all day. Now, that's a lesson that I actually picked up on while I was a missionary, right? I found that my work was a lot more effective if I spent time, listening to people and listening to what they had to say and learning how they thought about things and how they felt about things, instead of just like preaching to them all day and assuming that I was always right. In fact, I knew so many missionaries and even later in life, other Mormons and other capacities that always saw themselves as occupying a teaching role, sort of like they were the main characters in everybody's story, right? The truth is, guys, life is a lot more fun if you relax a little bit, if you shut up, and if you learn from the people around you, right? It's a lot more fun. You're a lot happier. And then you realize you don't have all the answers and you don't necessarily have to. It helps a lot with communication and language skills. It helps a lot with communication even in your native language. Anyway, the other lesson is another one that I keep repeating, though I'm not sure if you guys are actually paying attention or not. The second lesson is that you shouldn't just cram a whole bunch of words and grammar rules and whatnot. Just remember that true learning is not just memorizing something for a test. You have to actually understand before you can learn anything. And keep in mind that software like Anki is designed for long-term mastery, not for short-term cramming. And last but not least, I really mean this, cut yourself some slack, right? You don't need to learn German or French or freaking Thai or Arabic or whatever within 2 months. Don't try it, man. Who wants to do that? It sucks, right? Take your time, have some fun with the language, and take the time to actually understand what it is that you're learning. That is when it becomes more fun. Anyway, let me know what you think down below in the comments. I'm planning on talking about things that I've learned from other language learning environments as well. For example, the Foreign Service Institute has a lot of things in common with the MTC, more than you would expect, and there were a lot of similar problems. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk with you next week. Bye-bye.